Let's refocus on something that Intel was very successful, and that was microprocessors. And this was despite the fact that it was well acknowledged by all, including Mr. House, at the time, that Intel, and even this January, at an IEEE Life member meeting, he was a panelist, that Intel didn't always have the best architecture. They rarely did.
Maybe never?
Well, maybe
never.
Maybe never. But everyone knows they had the best semiconductor process. That was a given. But there was something else that Intel had that really no one else had, and that was the systems approach to microprocessors. That what microprocessors were not just a component, but they were a system. I see Jack Morris smiling there. Maybe he was in the same meeting as I was in 1974 when our VP of Marketing, Gene Carter, said a microprocessor is just like a gate. No, correcto. It's not like a gate. Tell us about the system approach and how Intel was able to use that, leverage that to succeed where others failed.
Well, you know, Ted kind of mentioned it, that Bob had this whole vision about, with Moore's Law, we're going to design, we need to understand system design. It wasn't like we were making a 7400 series like a TI. And he used to say that the more you put on the chip, the more specialized it becomes. Except in memories, I guess that winds up being the case. And so when I arrived in February of '74, Ted had been doing work for a long time on making design tools, and that had become a business in itself. We introduced the 8080, by the way, in May of '74, so this was just before the 8080 was introduced when I arrived, and there was already SIM boards and the emergence there shortly after of the blue box, the microprocessor development system. They became the Intellect system with in-circuit emulators and compilers and
Assemblers and
editors and languages and tools. And when I moved to the microprocessor business from the memory business at the beginning of 1976, the development systems business dwarfed the microprocessor business. That is, we were selling a lot more in tools than we were in microprocessors.
That's amazing.
Themselves.
That's amazing.
And I had accepted the job at Intel, but I told them I wouldn't show up until after I got customer acceptance on the 3200 at Microdata. And so I went to a meeting, Intel meeting, before I was an employee, and it was the meeting where this decision was made to hire the first field application engineer. And Intel started hiring application engineers in the field. And what the objective was is go find the customer of our competitors, our competitor. Don't hire our customers because we want them to keep buying our chips. Go hire our competitors' customers in the systems business to help our customers design in our microprocessors. So I'm sure we were the first company that hired customers in the field, and we would have in those days one field application engineer for every salesman. And later got to be two for every salesman, and they were there simply to show the customer how to use the compiler and the editor and answer questions, and that whole system, the combination of the tools that really got started with you, Ted. By then I think you'd moved on to telecom. But David Al had come in, Jim Lally, Bob Garrell was heading the engineering organization and developing these tools that made it easier to design with our chips, and then the field application engineers that were helping the customers with their designing, make them feel comfortable. We were the safe bet.
Thank you, Dave.
Well, actually,
But we really have a stinky architecture.
So just to sum up before we turn it over to Ted, Intel had this systems approach where they provided development systems, in-circuit emulators, so when the chip wasn't available, you still could emulate it.
Even when it was available, because you could put in breakpoints and
Right.
and
when it wasn't available,
traces and all
when
that
it
you
wasn't-
couldn't do with the chip.
Correct, correct. They had all kinds of support software, compilers, assemblers, editors, etc. They had FAEs, and most important, something National did not have with all these peripheral chips. Clock drivers, DMA, interrupt controllers, serial I/O, parallel I/O, blah, blah, blah. Now, the guy who really deserves a lot of credit in making all of these tools is Ted. He never got that credit. He started designing tools for the 4004 back in what, 1970?
Yep.
Something like that? Tell us about that.
Well,
Because that was the precursor of all the development systems.
we had to do application information for the microprocessors if we're going to sell them to other people. So we started a few little circuit boards where we could use one of Dov Froman's EEPROMs instead of the mass program 4001. And we would maybe either use the 4002 or simulate the ports and so on. Well, it seemed like these little sim boards, as we call them, could be a pretty useful tool for our customers. Now, one of the things that we'd run into is, you might say, the difference in the what I call the system mindset versus the semiconductor mindset. The semiconductor mindset was give them away. In other words, the revenue on those design systems doesn't count for anything. There aren't that many. Just give them away. And I argued against that. I said, eventually, this becomes a competitive business. And if we're giving this stuff away, that's going to be a loss. So we're going to stop giving it away. And I said, on the other hand, we could sell these boards and make a bit of profit on them, and it'll still be cheaper for our customer to buy that board than to do that work himself, which he would have to do to develop a system based on a microprocessor. So that was sort of, and fortunately, some people in the marketing side listened to that argument and agreed with it, and before long Intel had a major thing going with developments. But along the same lines, I won't mention names, but one time one of the high officials of the company came in to complain about the cost of supporting microprocessors. He said, we spend $30,000 a month developing software support tools for these. But I said, now wait a minute. We had revenues of $100,000 a month selling those software tools. But the semiconductor mindset is, if it isn't silicon, it doesn't count.
Exactly.